we turn here to this Old Testament prophet, and one of the things we're reminded of, I don't think it could have fell on a better day than Sanctity of Life Sunday, is the people in the culture that Micah is writing into is not indifferent to our own. Micah is writing in 8th century BC, about 700 years before Jesus is born, right? So that just gives you a time frame kind of in your mind. This is a time of unrest among the people of God. It would have been a time where they had wandered far from him, and God's, the sin and idolatry of the nation of Israel had sunk to new lows. And judgment was certain, right? It was inevitable. God was not going to let his people who were to shine as lights to the nation continue to live the way in which they had been living. And as we come to this book, there's several familiar passages, right, that are very, that we would consider what are famous coffee cup type verses, all right? And so you'll recognize those as we walk through. It's only 7 chapters. It takes you about 15 to maybe 25 minutes to read the book if you read it straight through. In fact, I would encourage you, that is the best way to read this book. It can be somewhat difficult to kind of follow along, especially if you break it up, but as a whole, it paints a beautiful picture of who our God is. It's a mixture of both judgment and hope. Judgment and hope. And you see that mixed in throughout the book. So let's just start here in chapter 1 and verse 1. All right, it says, "The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem." So we get everything we need here just to kind of set the stage for what's ahead, right? And the very first thing we understand is this is the word of the Lord, right? That's important, right? It's significant. Even though this was written thousands of years ago to a specific group of people into specific circumstances, it's God's word, right? And it was given right to us, right? So we can learn and we can grow from what was given to these people thousands of years ago because it's God's word. And so it's coming with all the force and all the authority of the word of God. And it's the word of God that was given to Micah, a man we know very little about, right? We know where he's from, right? He's from Moresheth, which is just a small city in a rural area, kind of 25 miles southeast of Jerusalem in the southern kingdom of Judah, right? So he comes from a rural area. This is not a big city type of guy, but his name means who is like the Lord, right? Now that's important, right? And a lot of times God uses the names of his prophets to say something about what their ministry is like, and certainly this book in particular, if you want to give a theme, the theme is to reveal to us the character of God. Right? Who is like the Lord? In fact, Micah uses a play on his own name in chapter 7, and you can look there if you want. Chapter 7, verse 18, it says, "Who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity and passing over transgression for the remnant of his inheritance? He does not retain his anger forever, because he delights in steadfast love." Now, there's your memory verse, all right? If you want to pull a verse out and you want to underline it and you want to memorize it, that's the one, right? Micah 7:18, it begins to tell us about the character of this God that we serve. In fact, Micah's going to write in the 8th century, and later on, God is going to use the words of this prophet Micah to save his prophet Jeremiah from death. Right? Jeremiah, much like Micah, had to prophesy to a people who were expecting judgment, and they didn't like his words. They didn't like his message. And so what did they want to do to Jeremiah? They wanted to kill him, right? And so there were those who looked back on the prophecy of Micah and said, Micah prophesied a message very much like Jeremiah. That came true, and they didn't kill him. Maybe we shouldn't kill Jeremiah, right? So, this is an important important man that God is going to use, not only now, but in the future, to accomplish his purpose. All right? So we get some idea of just the time frame of what's happening when we see the kings that are mentioned. Right? So Micah's prophesying the word of God into this time frame when Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah were king over Judah. Right? So Judah is the southern kingdom. Right? Israel was a northern kingdom. You say, he doesn't mention anything about the northern kingdom, and part of the reason is because his ministry is going to be to the kingdom to the south, and I think part of the reason is because the northern kingdom is about to disappear. It's about to go off the scene. He's going to mention the judgment of Israel to the north. The Assyrians are going to come, and they're just going to crush them, and they're going to be done. Right? And so right now we have these kings of the southern kingdom that are mentioned, and we get a little bit of insight into the Jotham and Hezekiah are what we consider good kings. Right? It says they followed after the ways of their father David, and then right in the middle is Ahaz, who would have been considered a wicked or evil king in the south. Right? And so just to give you a little bit of idea of what's happening here, I'm going to read. Right? If you want to get a quick summary of kind of what is happening, you can go back to 2 Chronicles and read for yourself. All right? 2 Chronicles chapters 27 through 31 will paint the picture of these three men. All three of them are all right there. All right? So if you want to read that, you can. I'm going to read from chapter 28 about this man Ahaz. All right? Chapter 28 of 2 Chronicles, verse 2. It says, he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. Right? That's the northern kingdom. They were all bad. Right? He even made metal images for the Baals. He made offerings in the valley of the son of Hinnom and burned his sons as an offering according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. And he sacrificed and made offerings on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Now, later on in verses 23 and 24, it says he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus and had defeated him and said, because the gods of the kings of Assyria helped them, I will sacrifice to them that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him and of all Israel. And Ahaz gathered together the vessels of the house of God and cut in pieces the vessels of the house of God, and he shut up the doors of the house of the Lord, and he made himself altars in every corner of Jerusalem. Right, now, what's that saying is simply this. There's a lot of idolatry going on, and the temple has been shut. Right? The place of worship of Jehovah, God, the one true God, he's closed the doors. Right? So this is a bad time in the history of Israel. Right? If that just gives you an idea to what Micah is coming into, right? What he's speaking into is a time of great wickedness, idolatry, oppression, and injustice. All right? Now, alongside of Micah at the very same time, some prominent prophets would have been what we consider contemporaries, which would have been Hosea and Amos and Isaiah. Right? And so each one of them would have been serving around the same time, two of them to the north, two of them to the kings of the south, all warning of this impending judgment. Right? And so the outline of our book tonight is not difficult. In fact, we can divide it into three parts, and there's really three messages here in the book of Micah. And they all start with just one word, hear. Listen, pay attention. All right, so Micah's going to preach three different messages, proclaim three, and they're all a message of judgment. But the first one is chapter 1, verse 2 through the end of chapter 2. And the message is simply this: judgment is coming. It's coming. All right, look out, pay attention. And then beginning in chapter 3 through the end of chapter 5, we see there's hope following the judgment. Right? So judgment and hope, right? Judgment and hope. And then in chapters 6 and 7, we see that there's a deliberation, right? So we see the deliberation of the judge, which is God himself, and then the ultimate judgment play out. And again, at the end of chapter 7, there's hope, right? So that's kind of just a three-part outline of Micah's message to the people. So we're just going to walk through this a little. We're going to read, not every verse, but we're going to read a good portion of these 7 chapters tonight. And so let's look at verse 2 here. It says simply this, message 1, hear you peoples, all of you, Pay attention, O earth, and all that is in it. And let the Lord God be a witness against you, the Lord, from his holy temple. So who's the message to here? Everyone, right? Listen up, all peoples of the earth, for behold, the Lord is coming out of his place and will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth, and the mountains will melt under him, and the valleys will split open like wax before the fire, like waters poured down as a steep place. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound good, right? God's coming. He's going to come in judgment, right? He's going to wipe some things out, right? In fact, in verse 6, he says, therefore I will make Samaria a heap in the open country, a place for planting vineyards, and I will pour down her stones into the valley and uncover her foundation. Samaria is what? It's the capital of the northern kingdom. It's the capital of Israel. He's saying what? It's done. It's finished, right? This is the center of idolatrous worship in the northern kingdom, and God's saying, it's finished, right? It's coming. And then notice verse 9, it says, for her wound is incurable, and it has come to Judah. Uh-oh. Not only is judgment coming to the northern kingdom, but he says what? This wound is incurable, right? There's no way out. The judgment is coming in response to your sin, your rebellion, your idolatry, and then he says what? And it's coming to the southern kingdom as well, right? God promises judgment on his people, right? So we know that this judgment that Micah is prophesying ahead of time will come to pass, right? The Assyrians are going to come, and they are going to besiege and overtake Samaria. They're going to they're going to wipe them out, right? And then, 130 years later, the Babylonians are going to come to the southern kingdom, and they're going to rip them from their homes and take them away into exile, right? Look down at verse 16 of chapter 1. It says, make yourselves bald and cut off your hair. You know, what are you talking about there? He said, this is what you do when you're mourning in their culture, right? For the children of your delight, make yourselves as the bald eagle, for they shall go from you into exile. Right? Your children aren't going to have a home. Right? They're going to be removed. Why? Because of your sin. In fact, what you see there in chapter 1 is the coming judgment, and then in chapter 2 you see the cause of judgment. And we're not going to read all of that, but notice just there at the very beginning, at the outset, in verse 1 of chapter 2, woe to those who devise wickedness and work evil on their beds. Verse 2 says, they covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them away. They oppress a man in his house and a man in his inheritance. Right? So what do we see taking place in chapter 2? Really what he's going to do is unfold the sin of the people is that of oppression. Right? There's great injustice that's taking place in the land of Israel. It's such that God has outlined for his people how they're to live, right, in his law, right, how they're to care for, love one another, serve one another, and the people of Israel are abusing each other, right? The rich are taking advantage of the poor, right? And down in verse 9 it says, the women of my people you drive out from their delightful houses, from their young children you take away my splendor forever, right? We have oppression of women and children and the poor, and God says, no, it's enough. If there's anything we understand, right, from this morning and then again tonight, is that God loves and cares for those who cannot help themselves. Right? He cares for the poor and the needy and those who are afflicted, and he's not going to allow that type of injustice to continue. Now, that's a good reminder, right? That we said Micah is going to reveal to us the character of God. Right? God is a just God. Right? He cares greatly about those who are being hurt and those who are being abused. And what we'll see here, sometimes that justice isn't immediate, but it is certain. Right? It is certain. God will set all things right. And even for God's people now, facing this certain judgment, he leaves them with a glimmer of hope at the end of chapter 2. Right? Look at verses 12 and 13. He says, I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel. I will set them together like sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. He who opens the breach goes up before them. They break through and pass the gate, going out by it. Their king passes on before them, the Lord at their head. And he paints this picture, right, of Israel, of Jacob, and he says what? Like a sheep, like a shepherd with his sheep, I'm going to gather you together, and I'm going to lead you, and I'm going to care for you. And so this is not the end of his people, even though judgment is coming, right? And so it's a good reminder. I mean, it's very possible there are some of you here tonight who are just walking in sin, right? Now maybe that's not blatant and obvious, all right? So maybe you've got your parents fooled. Maybe you've got your wife or your husband fooled. Maybe you got your pastor fooled. But you know you're living and walking in sin in a way that would not please the Lord. And what you can expect, chastisement. You can expect judgment. You should expect that, right? If you're truly a child of God. And at the same time, right, God chastises those whom he loves, right? And so there's a reminder for you tonight, if you're here and you're walking in sin, that God wants to draw you back to himself. Right? So along with this judgment comes grace and mercy. All right? So we see a glimmer of that in chapters 1 and 2. And then second message begins in chapter 3. Right? You see it again in verse 1. I said, hear you, heads of Jacob. So now he's going to move from this broad, wide message to all peoples, and he's going to direct his attention specifically at the leaders of the nation of Israel. Right? So chapter 3 is all about judgment of Israel's leaders. Right? And let's go to the end of the chapter here. Let's start with verse 9. It says, hear this, you heads of the house of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, who detest justice and make crooked all that is straight. Now, what's the role, right? The role of one who is leading, who is governing the people is what? He says it in verse 1. Is it not for you to know justice? They're the ones who are supposed to care for, right? To make sure justice plays out, and yet what they're doing is what? They're making that way crooked. They detest justice, and we see it play out in verse 10. Who build Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. Its heads give judgment for a bribe. Its priests teach for a price. Its prophets practice divination for money. What you got here? You got some corrupt leadership, right? You got governors, kings who are ruling, and they're saying, you give me enough money, I'll rule in your favor, right? You have priests for hire here, right? I'll tell you what you want as long as you pay me enough. I told you it's not all that different today, right? There are a lot of men on TV who will, you give them enough money, they'll tell you what you want to hear, right? And that's exactly what we see playing out here. What do they want to hear, right? Verse 11. Yet they lean on the Lord and say, is not the Lord in the midst of us? No disaster shall come upon us. What's the message? Nothing bad's going to happen. What's Micah saying? Something bad's going to happen. Right? Judgment's coming. They're saying, no, you give me enough money, I'll tell you all day. There's no judgment coming. Right? Is this not the very same message that we hear from these health, wealth, prosperity preachers? Right? God's never going to do anything bad to you. He's only going to do good things to you. Right? As long as you believe and you have enough faith and you give that faith promise, yeah, God's going to bless you. What's the problem with that? It doesn't line up well with what we see in the Word, does it? In this world you shall have tribulation. We can't stand and promise you that things are always going to go easy. In fact, God works many times through our trials and through our storms to bring about his purposes. We have corrupt leadership, and these are the ones who are supposed to be proclaiming the word of God. Right? They're supposed to be interceding for the people on behalf of God, and yet, what does he say to them in verse 7? He says, there is no answer from God. Right? These prophets, they don't hear a thing, right? They're not here. And in contrast to that, notice Micah. Micah in verse 8 says, but as for me, I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord and with justice and might to declare to Jacob his transgression and to Israel his sin. Now there's a noticeable difference here, right? Between Micah and these other leaders. It's not about the money. I'm filled with the Spirit of the Lord. And justice and might. And what's his concern? I'm going to declare God's truth. I'm going to declare his word. And his word says what? You have sinned and judgment is coming. Right? And it's right for us to call sin, sin. Right? And that's what Micah's doing here. Right? He's just going to, in the power of God's Spirit, he's going to call Israel out on their sin and rebellion. Verse 12 says, therefore, because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field. Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins. Right? Because it started at the top, right? With the leadership, right? The priests, the prophets, the kings, who should have cared for the people, and they did not. They oppressed the people, and because of that, judgment is coming. And we see the value and the importance of leadership among the people of God. Now, with that judgment comes what? Hope, right? Always, right? So there's a future hope here in chapter 4, right? It says, it shall come to pass in the latter days. Now, those latter days of chapter 4 are going to be a description of, when I say future hope, I mean future hope, way down in the future. This is talking about the millennial kingdom here, right? It's talking about, God's not done with Israel, right? Still not done with Israel. And so we see a picture here, maybe some familiar language you might see down in verse 3. It says, he shall judge between many peoples and decide for strong nations far away, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore, right? So we're looking at a time when there is perfect peace. There's no need for weapons of war at this point. In fact, all the nations are coming to Jerusalem. They're coming to Israel. Why? That they may learn the ways of this God, the one true God, and walk in his ways. Right? That's the picture that we see in chapter 4 here, a picture of hope. In fact, those who are oppressed are given this great hope in verse 6. In that day, declares the Lord, I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away, and those whom I have afflicted. And the lame I will make the remnant, and those who were cast off a strong nation. And the Lord will reign over them and Mount Zion from this time forth and forevermore. Right? Those who experience that oppression, God's going to, he's going to redeem, right? He's going to uphold. He's going to give them the justice that they deserve, right? That's the picture that we see here in chapter 4. And then chapter 5, we get this picture of the coming king, right? So we saw the coming shepherd in chapter 2, coming king in chapter 5. Again, familiar verse. You look at verse 2. But you, O Bethlehem Ephratah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient of days. Now, you can't read that and not know who that's talking about, right? I mean, we're looking back. 700 years before Jesus is born, Micah says, this coming king is going to be born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is where? It's nowhere, right? So little, so small, insignificant, inconsequential, and yet God is going to, out of her, bring forth the King of Kings. Who is it coming? He who is from old, from ancient of days. This eternal God entering into creation as a man to be what? Look at verse 3. He shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel, and he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall dwell secure. For now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be their peace. So we have both the first and the second coming of Christ right here in Micah chapter 5. Right? The coming king, the future hope, wrapped up in the person of Jesus Christ. Right here in Micah. Right? And as he's writing, right, we come to the third message, right, in chapter 6. You see that word again. Hear what the Lord says. Pay attention. Right? Don't miss it. What's the message here? And this is a kind of a unique section. It's almost a back and forth. It's Micah's kind of imagining the Lord confronting his people with their sin and then how they would respond back to him. Right? So in verse 6, or chapter 6 and verse 1, arise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, you mountains, the indictment of the Lord, and you enduring foundations of the earth, for the Lord has an indictment against his people, and he will contend with Israel. So there's this personal exchange that's happening. In verse 3, O my people, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? Answer me, for I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery. And I sent you before Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember what Balak, king of Moab, devised, and what Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him, and what happened from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. What's he doing here? Have I not been faithful? Have I not cared for you lovingly from the time that I brought you out of the land of Egypt? I didn't let Balaam curse you. I cared for you in the wilderness. I brought you into this land. What have I done that you would turn from me in this way? That's a good question to ask, isn't it? Particularly if you're walking or wandering away from the Lord at this time. Has he not always been faithful? Has he ever let you down? The answer to that is always what? It's always no. He's ever faithful. Right? He's always with you. And notice verse 6 here, we have this response, at least this imagined response from Micah, right? The people would respond with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? What's he saying here? God, what do you want from me? What do you want to make this right? You want another sacrifice? I'll give you another sacrifice. You want the fruit of my, whatever it is, right? What do we see here? We see religious ritual, right? God, I'll give another sacrifice. What do we got to do to make things right? And what's Micah say? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? He's sick of your sacrifices, right? The blood of bulls and goats. But what does he say? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. What does God want from his people? He wants them to walk with him. He wants to live in relationship with them. Right? That's what he wants. That's what he wants from us. Right? To walk humbly with God means what? To recognize him for who he is. He is God. We are not. So we bow before him and we live according to his plan and to his word. And so that's what he's calling for here. What does God want from you? He wants to walk in fellowship with you. And he wants us to walk according to his word, right? So to love kindness and to do justice is just to reflect the character of the God that you're walking with. That's the picture that we see here. And so that's what is expected of his people, and that's what's expected of you and I. But it's simply not happening, right? There's wickedness on every hand in the nation of Israel. They have walked away from him, and God has promised here, and in fact, in the rest of chapter 6, he just says, this judgment is going to be severe. It's going to be severe. And then at the beginning of chapter 7, this is what I call Micah's settled hope here. In response to God's judgment, you see his heart, right? Verse 1, woe is me, for I have become as when the summer fruit has been gathered, as when grapes have been gleaned. There's no cluster to eat, no first ripe fig that my soul desires. The godly has perished from the earth. There's no one upright among mankind. They all lie in wait for blood, and each hunts the other with a net. Their hands are on what is evil, to do it well. The prince and the judge ask for a bribe. The great man utters the evil desire of his soul. Thus they weave it together. Right? What do you see? He's saying what? God, you're right. These people are wicked. The injustice is present. It's everywhere. And Micah's going to come back and he's going to say, but not for me. Not for me. Notice verse 7. But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. In the midst of the judgment, Micah holds out hope. Hope for what? What hope does he possibly have? He knows this God. He knows, right? Verse 18, who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity and passing over transgression for the remnant of his inheritance? Micah knows God. He knows that God does not retain his anger forever. He delights in steadfast love. He will again have compassion on us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. He will cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. Where is Micah's hope? His hope is in the person of God, right? The character of God. As he considers the judgment that is coming, and it is certain, he says, my hope is still in you, God. I know that you will save. And so he's waiting on, I love that in verse 7, I will wait for the God of my salvation. I'm trusting in, I'm waiting in, I'm hoping in you. And then that hope not only in the person, but also in the promise of God. There in verse 20, you will show faithfulness to Jacob and steadfast love to Abraham, as you have sworn to our fathers from the days of old. God, you made a promise, and I know you're going to keep that promise. Now, if there's anything that we see as we read through this book, right? Micah says, God says this is going to happen. And it happened, right? I mean, he said judgment was going to come. The Assyrians came and they wiped out the northern kingdom. The Babylonians came and they took the southern kingdom into exile. He said there's going to be one who is born in Bethlehem, Ephratah, who's going to come. And he came, right? But there's some far-reaching promises here in the book of Micah, right? There's a kingdom that is coming, that this shepherd king is going to rule and reign. And if all of these other prophecies are true, then don't you think we can count these promises as true as well? Is there injustice in the world in which we live? Absolutely. There's oppression, there's injustice, and we, as God's people, we need to reflect his heart, right? To walk with him, to love mercy, to do justice. There's a danger for the people of God to fall into this pattern, right? Religious ritual with no care and no compassion. It happened to the nation of Israel here in the days of Micah. It happened to the religious leaders in Jesus' day. You remember what Jesus said to the religious leaders of his day? Matthew 23 and verse 23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. Right? They were all about the religious ritual, right? I'll tithe, all for show. But when it came to caring for and loving and showing the heart of God, it just wasn't there. And there's a real danger for that to happen to you and I today. We can get so caught up in our religious activity that we fail to show the love and compassion and grace of our God, to walk humbly with him, to love kindness, to do justice. So may that not be true of us, right? May we be actively showing the love of our God. Now, I know this was written 700 years before the birth of Christ, but Micah's hope and your hope and my hope is all wrapped up in this coming shepherd king, right? The one who is born in Bethlehem. He is the God-man who's going to faithfully rule, right? Think through that just for a moment. When Jesus comes, he's going to bear in his body the full weight of injustice. So this book of Micah points forward to one who's going to what? He's going to live the sinless life, the perfect life. He never does wrong. He never does injustice. He never oppresses. He always loves. And yet, on the cross, he's going to bear the weight of injustice. When he was reviled, he reviled not. He who knew no sin became sin for us. So when you read this picture, right, this Old Testament prophet, don't miss the portrait of Christ that we have. This one who sees, right? Who sees, this God who knows the injustice, the oppression, and he bears the full weight of it. And the shepherd king is one day coming back to set all things right. No injustice will go left unpunished. Right. So we have a picture here tonight. And so my encouragement to you would be, take 15, 20 minutes and read the book for yourself and see a picture of your God. This God who is holy and just and yet gracious and merciful. And each one of us here who know Jesus Christ have experienced the full length of that truth, right? We deserve God's justice and God's wrath because he is holy, and yet he's made it possible for us to walk with him through Jesus Christ.